Um, First and foremost, I'm a gospel preacher. And many of the things I'm going to say this week, I will bring in some of the mental health and addiction stuff that I do in my regular course or daily course. I have limited my private practice exclusively to Christians, and I am talking with anywhere from 4 to 7 or 8 Christians or Christian couples a day, 6 days a week, and Sunday's my day to be in the pulpit. But there's a lot of problems in our brotherhood, and many people bring those to me from across the country as well as outside of the states. And so I bring kind of a plethora of information. It is not my goal to teach you how to be a mental health person. It is my goal to teach you the gospel. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do, but you'll see the flavor of both in my presentations, which will make them a little different than many presentations. The term addiction is used very frequently today, and someone asked, is this a Bible term? And the answer is that addiction is talked about by definition many times in the Bible. But the word addiction actually is only used a couple of times in the Bible. One of those, it's in a positive way. It's in 1 Corinthians 16 and verse 15. And in the King James Version, it talks about being addicted to the ministry. That's in a positive way. Addiction is about obsessive compulsive behaviors. By obsessive, I mean that it gets on our mind and we just kind of ruminate about the thing, and then compulsion is acting on what's in the mind. So if we look at what addiction is, it's really about obsessing and a compulsion to act out. It is not something magical. It is not something to be used as an excuse. Well, I have an addiction, so it's okay for me to view pornography or to get drunk or whatever. It's not used as an excuse. It does not override self-will. But however, it can become a very natural pathway for our way of thinking, and what we would talk about is a long-term entrenched habit. Well, let me not get too far away from what we want to talk about in this. And at the end, if I'm too slow on this, I'm going to speed up and jump to the end because I don't want to miss that piece. So when the bell rings, I may zip forward here. So hold on to your seat. By the way, these PowerPoints are yours to use here however you choose to. If you want to post those on your website or copy these for the brethren, that's totally fine with me. Full permission. And also, I would say, while I'm here this weekend, if anyone wants to talk with me, I am available. I've cleared my schedule today, tomorrow, and Tuesday to be available to y'all however I may be of service to you. And by the way, those are freebie days. The church is picking up the tab on those. So if you want to talk to me, I'm not going to charge you. But if you talk to me on Wednesday, I may charge you. All right. So in the Bible, we find a few concepts here. In 1 Corinthians 16 and verse 2, Paul talks about meat for the belly and the belly for meat, but I will not be brought under the power of any. That word power is significant because what that says is that things can have power over us. In this, I would apply this to an eating disorder, someone who's brought under the power of food. That's your person. We're not going to talk much about that this week. But that's the person that sits down and wants to have a couple of Doritos and eats the whole bag and wants to go to the store and get some more, or eats a carton of ice cream in one sitting. This is the person that food has the power over them. I'm going to leave that for now, but the term, I will not be brought under the power of any, that describes an addiction, a repetitive, obsessive, compulsive behavior. Also, we see the term in 2 Corinthians 10 and verse 4. There the Apostle Paul talks about the Word of God is powerful to the tearing down of strongholds and everything that exalts itself against God. That word stronghold is significant because stronghold simply means that Satan has gotten into a person's life and has made camp there on some particular habit or ritualistic or obsessive compulsive kind of thing. And there Satan has that person. Any area that we have not surrendered absolutely to Jesus in, that's where Satan will set up camp. And he will start his operation from there and spread out ultimately like a cancer into our lives. Strongholds. Now there's another concept here. In the book of Job, the first chapter, God and Satan are having a conversation, and God asked Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There's no one like him in the whole earth. He's a righteous man. That'd be nice to have God compliment us like that, wouldn't it? But Satan's response is significant. He says, of course, you have built a hedge around him where I can't get to him. The word hedge. Stronghold, hedge. And so Satan tries to build strongholds in our lives, and God builds hedges. What that means is the more that you serve God, the more it becomes natural for you to serve God. It becomes something that becomes more than routine with us, hopefully, but it becomes something that's just what we do. Sunday mornings, for instance. I don't have to ask where I'm going to be on Sunday mornings. I know the answer to that. You do too. That's why you're here. So we have certain things that God builds hedges around us. We learn to trust God. When we walk by faith, we don't worry about the future. We'll talk about that Monday night. But strongholds and fortresses. The question for you and me is, are we allowing strongholds to be built in our life? And if so, what are those areas? Or are we allowing God to build hedges around us where Satan can't get to us? That's quite an admission of Satan. I can't get to him because of the hedges. So we won't belabor that point. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, in the book of Daniel, the three Hebrew children that are here, and also we mentioned Daniel, that these are young men that refused to eat the king's dainties. Now that word dainties is a little hard to define, but basically it was some types of herbs that the king was serving, and the thought was that if you eat this particular thing or take this thing, it'll expand your mind and you'll be able to think more clearly, so forth. I don't know that that is about drugs, but I suspicion that it is. It cannot be determined from the word itself. But what I do know is that these Hebrew children stood against the king's wishes and said, we're not eating that. We're not eating these things. And so let's set up a test and kind of a research project. And at the end of the time, we'll see who can think the best. And of course, you know, God's children did. But here's the point, that these three Hebrew children had the courage to stand up to even the king and the king's court and say, no, we're not going to do that. There's certain things we're not going to put into our body. Now, this lesson today is going to be largely kind of centered toward drug addictions, but it will introduce us to what an addiction actually is. Well, the two approaches that we want to use in our weekend. One is that the Christian is challenged to keep ourselves unspotted from the world, according to James. He talks about pure religion, and part of that includes keeping yourself unspotted or untainted from the world. In other words, Christians look different than the world. Now, I'm not talking about your physical appearance. I'm talking about your character. We think different. We approach the world different. We approach things through the eyes of faith rather than sight. Christians approach the world differently. So keeping ourselves unspotted from the world is one of the things that we want to talk about. I marvel at how many people are so-called raised in the church that want to wonder what's happening on the other side. What did I miss out on? I tell you what you missed out on is a whole bunch of mess. And let us thank God if you had godly parents and godly heritage that you were raised in the church and you didn't miss out on anything that's really important. But a lot of Christians want to peep over the fence and see if the grass is greener on the other side. And guess what? When they go over in that area, they don't know how to play. They don't know what the rules are. So when Christians step over that line, they generally go down faster and harder and get caught up in really strange things because they don't know how to play life by that set of rules. They've been playing it by God's rules. Well, so what we want to try to do is to help instruct us where we keep ourselves unspotted from the world. And the other approach is those that are out in the world who are trying to get out of that lifestyle. The lesson is going to hit that. So we're going to kind of come at this from a couple of different angles. Don't lose your faith over what people tell you is fun or entice you to do. Satan is a roaring lion, and he goes around trying to devour us. That word devour is a bloody term. He's not out to play with you. Well, there was a guy, his name was Josh, and what he said is, in terms of his how he got caught up in drugs, I didn't start out thinking I'd be here, that is in a long-term treatment facility. I had a great swisher, a bag, a pipe, and a syringe, and I just went out to have a good time. But I didn't come back. I couldn't find the path. I was on the end of a pipe all along thinking, someday it'll be different, but not today. What Josh was describing in this is he got caught up in the world of addiction, is that he did not intend to get caught in the trap, but he did. And when he did, he couldn't find his way back. And that's why he was in our treatment facility. Well, here's what I must say very clearly, is the thing that we are playing with, if we are playing with addiction, it's not playing back. Addiction is out to capture you. It's out to make us captive. Now, the Bible talks about addiction in several terms. We've already mentioned the word stronghold, and we've talked about being devoured. That's what Satan tries to do. Galatians 5:19 through 21 lists the works of the flesh, and among those are drunkenness and revelings. And he also talks about the word sorcery or witchcraft, depending on which translation you have. I'm certain that you've heard by now that is the Greek word pharmakia, which is the word that we get our word pharmacy from. And what it means is the casting of a spell by mixing potions. In other words, drugs. Potions that alter the brain to where we respond in a different way. Now, what does God say about this? He says, those that practice such things shall not inherit the kingdom of heaven. If you don't want to go to heaven, then you can do those things. And that's all the enjoyment you're going to get out of your whole existence. But you're going to pay a horrible price. But if you want to go to heaven, you can't do that. These things do not travel with people who are heading to heaven. They travel with people that are heading to hell. Well, Paul also talks about the snare of the devil. When I was a kid, on my grandfather's little 10 acres and my grandmother, we would set snare, try to catch a bird. And we'd set up a box with a stick, and what we're trying to do is to trick a bird into going under there, and we'd pull the string, and we'd catch the bird. At least we thought that. I don't know if we ever caught anything, but we tried that. The snare of the devil, it's a trap. And that's what addiction is. It's a trap that Satan tries to lure us into. And wine is called a deceiver in Proverbs 20 and verse 1. Those that are deceived thereby are not wise. And by the way, there's a lot we could talk about on drunkenness, but that's not particularly our topic today. Now, here are some companions of the lifestyle. Addiction does not travel by itself. As a matter of fact, if you find one addiction, you will find more than one addiction. Usually they travel in at least threes. And so obsessive compulsive behavior has several applications, And people demonstrate obsessive compulsive or addictive behavior in several ways. For instance, a person may have a drug addiction, but they may also have a porn addiction, and they may have a gambling addiction. Those travel together. And what they do is they consume a person's life. There are other addictions that travel together. Now, the companions of the lifestyle, it's called in 1 Peter 4 and verse 4, that they think it's strange that you don't run with them to the same excess of riot. In other words, a wild lifestyle. And the world thinks that's strange that you don't get involved with them on that. I'm going to look at that in a minute. We also see fornication and adultery run very, very much. Sexual immorality of various sorts run with addictive behavior. I work downtown Indianapolis helping homeless people to find housing for about 8 years. I helped with that. Ran a veterans program as well. And what I noted is those in the drug quagmire, that these people actually, fornication, adultery, abusing their body, that just went right along with it. And we'll talk more about that. Lasciviousness, acting vulgar, or lust, that fits in here as well. We'll talk more about that also this week. And deceptive behavior. Those caught up in addictions are going to find that truth loses its value. And in place of that, lying becomes very, very easy, even when it's not a situation that you particularly have to lie about. You just lie because you open your mouth. The standard joke for addicts is, you know how when an addict is lying, and the answer is they're opening their mouth. But that's a standard statement that you'll hear in a lot of recovery groups. Also, degrading our body with all sorts of things. There's a whole range of sexual disorders or sexual issues, and Paul talked about that in 1 Corinthians, about those that basically gave their body to fornication. In Romans 1, it talks about homosexuality and about lusting after various things. And that'll be our lesson here this morning in our worship. But in 1 Peter 4, verse 1 through 4, therefore, since Christ has suffered in the flesh, arm yourself also with the same purpose, because he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin. Now look at verse 2. So as to live the rest of the time in the flesh, no longer for the lust of men, but for the will of God. Those who have surrendered to God, that time past is plenty sufficient. And the rest of our time in this human body, we live for the will of God, not to fulfill the lust of the flesh. All right, now these verses need to be in our mind. David said, thy word have I hid in my heart that I may not sin against thee. We need to have these words in our heart. So when we are caught in a situation of temptation or opportunity, we need to have those words that I live no longer for the lust of men, but I live for the will of God. Why? Because I have surrendered to Jesus. I have surrendered body, soul, and spirit to him. And so I no longer live that way, even though I may have lived that way in the past. Well, for the time already past is sufficient for you to have carried out the desire of the Gentiles, having pursued a course of sensuality, lusts, drunkenness, carousing, drinking parties, and abominable idolatries. Now let me just camp there and I'll finish verse 4 in just a moment. But he tells us that our past life, our old way of life, before we became a Christian, that was plenty sufficient time to have wasted our time on the desire of heathens. In other words, having a course of living like the world. And he tells us about the course, pursued a course. That's a pathway, a life pathway. And a course of sensuality, lust, and then look at this, drunkenness, carousing, and drinking parties. Now, those are three different Greek words, and there are three in the English as well. And what he is describing there is three stages of alcohol addiction. And he goes all the way from just the sipping or kind of nursing the bottle at a party or an outing. In other words, having a beer or so, or having a cooler or something. He talks about that. And then he talks about the carousings. That's your party where you're feeling pretty tipsy. And then he talks about drunkenness. That's falling down, staggering drunk. He addresses all three levels, and what he says is that the time passed is enough time to have spent doing that. Christians don't look at how do I get involved in that. How do I get involved if I'm out with a group of people at a company function and we're down in a setting and they're serving something. Do I engage in having sips of the wine and all that? The answer is absolutely not. Your example, your light, and your being the salt of the earth are critical at times like that folks know you are different. You don't follow the course like everybody else. We don't try to fit in. Fact is, what we want is the world to fit in with Jesus. Now look at verse 4. Here's the response you're going to get from other people. In all this, they are surprised that you do not run with them into the same excess of dissipation, and they malign you, or excess of riot, some translations say. And they malign you. In other words, expect to be made fun of. Expect somebody to call you a Bible thumper. Expect somebody to say you're a fuddy-duddy. Expect someone to say, man, you don't do that stuff? You're dead. You're a walking dead man. Someone told my dad that, and he said, no. He said, I'm not dead. You are in your trespasses and sins. And that's exactly right. Christians need to stand up and not be ashamed when we are called out because we're standing for Christ. They'll make fun of you. Expect it. You're going to be different. So you're riding around a car and someone's passing around the little cigarette and they want you to take a toke or whatever. Here, enjoy this good stuff, man. You don't do that. Fact is, you need to wonder why you even got in the car with folks like that. Especially if you know it ahead of time. But they're going to make fun of you, and they're going to think it's strange that you don't go along with them. Expect that. Christians have to be different. The DSM-5 revised version lists some criteria for addiction. Assuming that clock is running. If it stops, I'm going to be preaching all day. All right. So hopefully the battery holds out. All right. But addictions are, here's the criteria that is listed for medical as well as mental health, the things we look for: increased or decreased tolerance. I'll talk about that in a moment. That means that you're able to handle it or not handle it the way you used to. Withdrawal symptoms would be such things, if we talk about drugs, such things as getting the shakes, or if we're talking about methamphetamine, the heebie-jeebies, feeling like all the nerve endings are all standing up at one time. The inability to control or quit. In other words, I've tried to quit 15, 20, 30, 50 times, but I slow down and then I go right back to where I was, often even worse than it was before. Inability to control or quit. In other words, what the attempts I'm making are not working. I'll talk about how to overcome that. Using over a longer period of time than intended. Here's the person that stops off for happy hour, and 3 o'clock in the morning they're shutting the bar down, and someone's going to have to take them home, or they try to make it home on their own. That's longer than intended. And continued use despite consequences. Family problems, legal problems, various problems, but it doesn't stop the person. Okay? When we see those kinds of things, what we're saying is this person is truly addicted. And preoccupation, that means they're thinking about it all the time. Preoccupied, when I get off work, how am I going to get my drink, my fix, or whatever it is, and we're planning for the next use. As a matter of fact, we're planning so much that any good addict, if there is such a thing, is going to have a stash somewhere. They'll have something hidden out in the garage, or they've got a backup just in case they can't get what they want. They plan to use again. And then blackouts, that's not fainting, that is periods of time they look like we look this morning, but they don't recall that later. I wonder sometimes our brethren don't get blackouts during services. When we're talking, they just kind of sit there. And you have seen Uncle Joe's eyes that you can paste on. You put those on, and that way it looks to me like you're awake. Well, I don't have any of those, so you all have to stay awake. All right. Every class of drug, except for nicotine, has the capacity to produce or to mimic symptoms of psychiatric disorders, such as DTs, dementia, amnesia, mood disorders, psychosis, sexual disorders, sleep disorders, and so forth. That's out of the manual. And what it says is be careful when you're diagnosing that a mental health issue, that you're not really diagnosing an addiction issue that actually looks like a mental health issue. Now, what that says is that addictive behavior changes your character and the way you come across to people. You won't be the same when you get caught up in addiction. Okay. God only asks us to stay away from the things that are going to hurt us. So I'm going to take us down a path this morning. And on the outside, what we see when a person is addicted, on the outside, we're going to see a person that maybe is trying to deal with life's issues, and they're having all kinds of problems with relationships, having problems with especially their relationship with their chemical, and usually are trying to mask something. I have yet to talk with a person that is caught up in substance addiction that at the very core of that is not pain of some sort. In about 25 to 50% of those people, the pain is childhood trauma. We live in a day and an age to where things are going on in homes that never should even be talked about, but it's going on. Immorality, incest, abuses of various sorts, even renting out their children for sexual purposes. Those kinds of things go on in the addictive family to get the money to pay for the drug. Well, all right. Let me not cover all of this. On the inside, what's going on is triggers or cravings. The behaviors change. There'll be psychological changes to where when you see the person, you may not even quite be sure that's that person. Although you may have known them, and a lot, it's like, well, it looks like it. Is that them? And you don't know. Why? Because the behavior is changing. The outward appearance also can change. The way they approach life changes. Now, let's talk about tolerance. When a person first uses substances, what they are going to do is they're either going to experience a very euphoric high the first time, or it's going to be a bad experience. But as a person progresses in their addiction, this particular chart identifies that they start chasing that first high. And so the way they do that is they chase it, and this line goes downward, notice. The first high also has a low. When you come off of it or withdraw from it, from that use, you have a low. Now, that low may take you almost back to normal. The white line is about normal. It may not be showing up, but it's about what's normal for that person. But notice what happens, that as the person continues to use, the highs get lower, but the lows also get lower. To where now a person in more advanced stages, they're going to be using not to get high, but just to try to feel normal again, to get back to what normal would be. That's the addict. Now, there's several things you can do when that happens. And this is how people get deeper and deeper into it. What you do is you can ride it out. You can ride it out. You can take more of the substance to chase that effect, or you may shift from one drug to something that's stronger, or you may try combinations. And that's how people really get deeper and deeper into substance addiction. Now, that same thing is true as a pattern or model when we're going to talk about other things today, like pornography and cyber addiction and that kind of thing. The same thing is true, is that the first experience, if it was pleasurable, we start trying to chase that experience, but what we do is we increase the things we're looking at. We maybe go to something different. Maybe we take it off the screen into real life, and now we're out at strip clubs and we're making rendezvous, or we're doing some kind of online sexting or things like that. That same principle applies. We start chasing the highs in order to avoid the lows. That's addiction. Okay? And that pattern will hold true. Now, I need to say something about this very quickly. And that is, tobacco is perhaps the most dangerous drug. Why? Because tobacco, nicotine, over time, kills people. 1 in 3 people who use nicotine for extended time will die a smoker's death. COPD, cancer, various things. It affects your body, your body's organs. God did not make us with a smokestack. Vaping also has been an alternative. And so I'm throwing that in here, and there's a lot out there on vaping, but some of the studies that are out there now, 99% of vapes have nicotine in them. That's the tobacco. But the vaping affects people's lungs, it affects organs, and other things. I'm not going to go into all that now, but if you want to talk about that, I can certainly go into detail with that. But it changes the synapses in your brain and blocks pathways. All right. Designer drugs. These are things that are not found in common. They're not natural. Designer drugs are made in a lab. And that is, we take different things and we put them together, and they're synthetic. And methamphetamine is one of those. Everything in methamphetamine has every ingredient. Has a skull and a crossbone on the bottle that says this is poison, don't use it. So we mix all those poisons together and we come out with methamphetamine, otherwise known as ice or other street names. And people get caught up in this stuff. It heightens sexuality. It is a stimulant. It will set your body really high. And what we saw for a while is people involved with cocaine, but they shifted over to methamphetamine. Methamphetamine was brought up out of Mexico by Hell's Angels, bike groups, and the white supremacists. So you don't find a lot of this in the black communities. You find more cocaine and crack cocaine in those. But what we do know is that methamphetamine will give you a longer high than cocaine. And so the cocaine is going to last maybe 20 to 30 minutes for a snort. But methamphetamine can last up to 8 hours. And so for the same money, if you had the choice of getting high on meth or getting high on cocaine, and it's the same money, would you choose 8 hours or 20 minutes? And so we see how that became very addictive. Morphine also, various other things. All right, let me look at brain, and then we're going to zip almost to the end here. This would be a SPECT scan. By the way, Dr. Daniel Amen has a lot of good material. One of the books he wrote is Change Your Brain, Change Your Thinking. And what he talks about is the paths of the brain. This is one of the SPECT scans. This would be what a normal brain would look like, and you notice the difference in the colors from these different scenes. If we look at the next one, this is a sample of a brain that someone's had a stroke. And what looks like holes in the brain are not holes in the brain. They're areas the brain's not functioning anymore. And so it looks like holes. Well, compare that to the normal brain that you saw. Now we can understand why people may have trouble with their speech or with body movement or whatever, because part of the brain is no longer functioning right. Now, the good thing about the brain is that where some pathways are destroyed, we can train people to have alternate pathways to the same thing. And that's what physical therapy and a lot of those things are about. Well, here's the real reason not to use drugs, and that is because they damage your brain. When you damage a person's brain, you damage that person's access to themselves. Let that sink in. In other words, that the addict brain is not going to think or function like the brain is meant to function. Here's an example. Here's cocaine and methamphetamine, both stimulants. And think about what we just looked at with the normal brain. Notice the color changes, but also notice the gaps in the brain that when cocaine or methamphetamine hit it, look at the gaps, like a Swiss cheese brain. You want to have that kind of brain? That's what coke addicts and methamphetamine have. Alcohol. Notice the color changes to where we don't get the normal stuff going on in the brain. Heroin does the same. We get a lot of people saying, well, I don't know what's wrong with marijuana. We need to legalize marijuana. I'll tell you what, this is a marijuana brain. If you'll notice, all the color except for a little purple and a little blue, all of it's gone. That brain is not functioning right. And altered concept of time and space and other things there, and I won't go into all that detail on that. But that's the marijuana brain. So I ask people in the addiction groups, which brain do you want? Do you want the marijuana brain, or do you want a normal brain? If you want a normal brain, then quit smoking pot. If you want to have a normal brain, you're going to have to give up your cocaine and your methamphetamine. And get back to, I am fearfully and wonderfully made, and I have to learn to deal with life on life's terms without using a crutch or something that I think is going to take me away, without self-medicating. I have to learn how to live life on life's terms. Okay, here's some pictures of people on methamphetamine. These are mugshots. Here's a guy that was picked up for methamphetamine. That's the first time he was picked up. And then 5 years later, this is what he looks like. Do you see that it changes you? I love this picture. Here's a young woman that was picked up, and here a year and 5 months later, here's the second time. Notice the bumps on her face? That's methamphetamine, that's bumps. She also has meth mouth, and what that is an erosion of the teeth produced by long-term use of methamphetamine. Well, what I get the biggest kick when I show these pictures in groups. What I ask is, you young ladies in this group, do you want to look like that? And most of them say, I don't want to use that stuff. It can make you look ugly. I'll tell you what, if that's your motivation to quit, that's okay with me. Just quit if you don't want to look ugly. All right, I won't spend much more time on this. Okay, now, let's get to the scriptures. That's the background. But the scriptures Addiction is a false pathway to spirituality. As a matter of fact, in recovery groups, what we talk about is you need a spiritual relationship. The first 3 steps of the 12-step program are about surrender. They're called the surrender steps. And they start out with, I'm not in charge. I've become powerless and my life is unmanageable. I'm not in charge, that's step 2. Somebody else is. That's step 3. Who is that? That's about, as they would talk about, higher power or God. By the way, the 12 steps originally had Bible verses by them. And as a matter of fact, you can still get that. 12-Step Christianity is one of those books that puts the Bible verses by it. When you look at the 12-step, you can preach that. And a lot of times, Brenda said, that was a wonderful lesson. It's like, well, I just preached the 12-step outline. Anyway, yeah. But the first 3 steps are about surrender. In other words, you have to come to terms that you've lost control of your life. You have surrendered your power to something else. All right? God's Word gives us all things that pertain to life. Stop there. He's telling us 2 things here. All things that pertain to life. How to live on planet Earth. That's your physical being, your daily existence. That's what God's Word, and it gives you everything pertains to that. And godliness, that's your spirituality. And God's Word gives you all of that. You don't have to be looking for that in the bottom of a bottle or the end of a pipe or with a needle in your arm. Or out on the internet. We can expand that to all the addictions. You won't find it in the bottom of a Dorito bag. By the way, I'm not against Doritos. I like them. Yeah, you won't find the answer to life just by eating more because you feel empty. That's why people overeat. Compulsive overeaters feel empty in their life usually. Okay, that's a whole nother addiction. Okay, we're told as Christians that not only does God's Word give us everything that pertains to life and godliness, but we're told to avoid even the very appearance of evil and give no occasion to the adversary to speak evil of us. That means our lifestyle needs to be above board. If someone says, these young men up front here, they look like they're dope fiends. People look at them and say, no, they don't look that way. Why? Because they look like good Christian men. That's how they look. Okay. But that's not how you look if you're living in the world. Give no occasion to the enemy to speak evil of you. Our speech needs to betray us that we are children of God. And there's things we don't talk about. There's things you try to tell me a dirty joke, you're going to get the hand. Don't do that. And we speak up. We stand up. That's what Christians do. And I tell you what, if we don't fight harder than the world, then the world's going to get us. Make no provision for the flesh to fulfill the lust thereof. By their fruits you shall know them. Be not deceived. Evil companions corrupt good morals. You hang out with people that are addicts, whatever they're addicted to, and they are going to pull you into it. If that's their conversation, they're going to talk about those things. I marvel at the number of people. As I said, I deal exclusively with actually conservative members of the church, and keeps me very busy. But I marvel at the young people and some older that are coming to me with, they're caught up in gender identity issues. These are people in our pews in conservative congregations wondering if maybe they were born in the wrong body. How'd you get that stuff? You've been hanging out with the wrong people. You've been listening to that stuff online. Someone's engaged you in conversation. A fool can ask you a question that you may not be able to answer, not because you're a fool, but because the question's the wrong question. Don't get caught up in the snare of the devil. He talks here about our language. The good person speaks out of the abundance of the heart. And that will tell what kind of person we are. Now, what are we supposed to be thinking about? Not how to go out and get high, not how to go and get online and surf and chase sexual lust, but instead we were to think about the things that are true, honest, just, pure, lovely, and of good report. And those are the things we need to think about. In other words, keep your mind clean. And here's why I'm saying that. Not only because God said it, because what your mind dwells on, your body will act on. Let that one sink in. What you're feeding on will come out in your actions. And so as we see people with the wrong kind of actions, we need to ask them, what poison well have you been drinking from? And let's go back and let's change wells. Get you a different pool to drink out of. What the mind dwells on, the body will act on. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. Let us cast off the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. Let us walk honestly. Honesty is the operative word here. As in the day. That's what we're supposed to do. Here's what you're not supposed to do. Not in rioting, drunkenness, chambering, wantonness, strife, and envying. That's what you're not supposed to do. Don't set your course in life in those things. But we put on the Lord Jesus and we make no provision for the flesh. In other words, we're not planning our next surf out on the net. We're not planning our next high. We're not planning our next gambling time. We're not planning our food addictions or our relationship addictions. What we're doing is we're not making provisions for the flesh to fulfill the lust thereof. We're not feeding our lust. We're feeding our spirit and our soul on the things from God. The Word of God is sufficient. By the way, I was pretty grown, I thought, before I realized Proverbs had a lot of good stuff in it. And in the first chapter of Proverbs, here's a father whom we talk with people. So, did you have the talk? Did your dad have the talk with you? Your mom have the talk with you? And someone says, well, where do you find about the talk? Proverbs. The first 10 chapters is a dad talking to his son about life. And 2 of those chapters, 5 and 7, he talks about immoral people. But in that first chapter, he talks about don't run with a gang to do evil. Don't hang out with those that are lurking for innocent blood. Don't become an accessory to crime or a party to sin. Don't go along with the crowd. Thou shalt not go with a multitude to do evil. And then we're told to come out from among them and be separate. That's the Christian. That's going to make you appear to be different than your friends. But I tell you what, you'll have some other friends who they want to be different too. What is our response as a church? Is that the first bell? Yes. Okay. That's the second bell? No, that's the first. Let's take a vote.
One late.
Is that the first bell or the second? Do I have more time or do I need to shut up? That was the second bell. Okay. All right. Well, this is our response. As a church, we need to provide opportunity for people that are caught up in their addiction. We don't abandon them, but instead what we do is we bear one another's burdens. We try to edify, build people up. There's a young lady down in Louisville that is caught up in all kinds of things, and she's really struggling to do what's right, I think. But she's got one foot in the world and one foot in the church. She's studying with folks and she's coming out of a lot of what she's doing. She found it strange the other day when she snorted her methamphetamine right in front of me, and I told her, I will not see you again if you ever do that. She didn't see me for about a month, and then she came back. She said, I need to talk to you, and she was restored down where she is. But families need to work to have healing, and also the church's role is we need to be confessing our faults one to another, praying one for another. There's a difference in repenting and reporting, and it's not about talking about what we did. It's about repenting of what we did. And elders need to be equipped. We need to know what the resources are that are out there. And the bottom line for all of this today is this: the church has to pull harder than the world. So my question for this congregation is, what are you doing as a group of people and as individuals? What are you doing to help people come out of sin? That goes way beyond meeting just a few times a week in a building. That's our lesson. If I ran over, I did. All right, we'll start there in the next session.